In this video, we're going to look at a relatively new Excel function called XLOOKUP. This function does all sorts of things, but one of the places where you can use XLOOKUP is as a replacement for VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP. So I'll show you how to do that in this spreadsheet. But this new function XLOOKUP has significantly more functionality, and it's much more powerful than the old VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP. And I would strongly recommend, if you are a user of VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP, that you move away from those and replace that with XLOOKUP. Okay, so we have some data in my spreadsheet. It's in a table, so we're going to do some table style references to the data. That's not important. We could do normal references to the table as well, range references, but we're going to use the table references here for the most part. Okay, so first we're going to start doing a vertical lookup. So we're going to look up the name in the first column, and we're going to pull out the data in the column with heading type 1. So it's this first set of data here. Okay, so with XLOOKUP, our lookup value is name. Our lookup array, so this is the first thing that's different between this function and VLOOKUP. They've separated the lookup array from what's being returned, and that adds some functionality. So our lookup array is this first column of data, the names, and you can see the structured reference data, square bracket name. And then we can pass the return array. So the return array in my case here is type 1, so it's going to be a structured reference again. And we can see XLOOKUP, if we're looking up the name A in that first column, type 1 is a 1. And if we look up B, it becomes a 6. And if we look up C, it becomes a 5. So that's just standard lookup. We can do that with VLOOKUP as well, so I'll do that. VLOOKUP, lookup value, table array. I'm going to pass in all of my data. Again, for this example, I don't need this, but we are going to pull it all in. Column index 2, we're counting here. So column index 2 is that second column. And then we've got this parameter here, which is either true or false. It defaults to true. I'm not a big fan of true. So again, it's going to do, if it's true, it will look up the nearest value. And we'll get in trouble here. So if I do true, for example, it works for C, but it doesn't work for B. Because when you put in a B, it says which is nearest, A or C, and it defaults to A. So easier with VLOOKUP, and almost always when I use VLOOKUP, I'm going to set that last parameter to be false, which means it has to do an exact match. So I get what I expect. Okay, so that's our VLOOKUP. There's our type 1. Again, nothing new or interesting here. We're doing exactly what we've done before with a VLOOKUP. Okay, so let's do a couple of extra things here that we can see. So first off, we can look at the next parameter in XLOOKUP, which is if not found. What should you return if it's not found? So for example, name not found could be returned. And if I put in D, we get name not found. Let me make this a little wider and you'll see. So name not found got returned. So we can give a more informative message when something doesn't work. Okay, the next parameter is what's known as match mode. Now there are 4 choices here. We can do an exact match, which is the default, which is what almost always one's going to use. We can do an exact match or next smaller item. So again, that's sort of A, B, and C. We can do an exact match or next larger item. Similar to what VLOOKUP did, VLOOKUP gave us exact match or next smaller, almost. It assumed they were ordered. Or we can do a wildcard match. So the wildcard match is kind of interesting. So I put 2 in and C just works. But let's change this to cow, for example. And of course, C is not found. But if we do C star, it finds it, right? So a star is this, what C star means is anything that starts with a capital C and ends with whatever. So it has to have a C in it. We could also do C question mark, A star is any number of characters. A question mark is a single character. So we can do C question mark W and it matches, whereas C question mark doesn't find anything. So that's a new powerful feature, is the what's called wildcards. And then finally, the other thing, which again, I'm probably not going to use a whole lot in my Excel because my Excel spreadsheets don't tend to be too big, but it's some nice functionality if you have a very, very large table of data. So this last parameter is search first to last, start at the first, in this case, row, and work your way to the end. Search last to first, so you could search from the bottom up. Binary search, so the binary search basically assumes the data is sorted in some way, ascending or descending, and then can do a much faster search to find the data. Now that would be great if you had thousands of rows of data. I don't, so I'm going to ignore that for the most part, but useful new feature. Okay, so let me go back. Let me get rid of my cow. There we go. And we need a C. There we go. Okay, so that's some new functionality in XLOOKUP, which is definitely more powerful than what it had. Now here's another bit of new functionality. Because we've separated the data that we're looking up into and the data we are returning, it means we don't have to have order. So VLOOKUP, it looks up in the leftmost column of data. Here, I want to look up under new name, which is the rightmost column of data. So I can do XLOOKUP, lookup values X. The lookup array is going to be the rightmost column of data. And the return array, where we get our data, is again still in this one, type 1. And it looks up X. Where's the one? Sorry, it looks up type 1, the answer for X, which is of course 1. If we plug in Z, we get 5, and so on. So that's something we can't do using VLOOKUP. Now we can do the same thing with horizontal lookups. So I'm not going to go through all the functionality here, but we can do XLOOKUP. We are looking up type 1. We'll look in the headings. And we'll take our return array to be the second row. There we go. So we pulled out the type 1. We're looking at the C's, so type 1 is 5. That makes sense. And we can do the same thing with HLOOKUP. Lookup values type 1. Table array is this. We are in the third row. And again, I'm going to use false. I get the same answer. And if we change this to type 2, we get the same answer. So this works. Again, that's just a straight replacement of horizontal lookups. I can do the same sort of thing I did with the vertical lookups. If I had a row at the end, for example, where I wanted to use that as my key to look up, I've separated the key in the row in which I look up my data from the row which I return. And so I can do those sorts of lookups where the data is not organized the way XLOOKUP and HLOOKUP want it. Now there is some more functionality that I can take using XLOOKUP. So, for example, and again, we've talked about array formulas before. So an array formula return is a formula that returns an array of data. XLOOKUP can return an array of data. So we're going to add up the results of XLOOKUP. The lookup value is type 1. The lookup array are my headers. The return value is my data. So this is my data. You'll see it come out as my data, right? Data. Oops, forgot a parenthesis. There we go. Okay, so what does this do? XLOOKUP B15, type 1. Data headers are all my headers, that first row. Data is all of the data. You can see it there starting in the second, third, and fourth rows. So that's my data. Sum is going to add them all up. So this XLOOKUP returns the column of data, type 1, type 2, type 3. Sum adds up that column of data. You can see 12, and you can see in the type 1 column, we've got 1, 5, and 6, which adds up to 12. If I change this to type 2, we get 19, which is 9, 8, and 2, and so on. So that's something we cannot do using a VLOOKUP or an HLOOKUP. So that's a more powerful feature. We can also leverage this feature to do a horizontal and vertical lookup at the same time. So let's see how that works. We're going to do an XLOOKUP. So what we're looking for is we're going to look up new name, C, and we want to, sorry, the name, I got those backwards. Let's just do name, okay? So we're going to look up the name, C, and we're going to find out what the new name is, Z. But I can change this if I want. So we're going to do XLOOKUP, C. The lookup array is, of course, that first column of data, name. The return array is another XLOOKUP. The lookup value this time is my second heading, my heading. My lookup array are the headers. And I'm returning the data. Two parentheses here. So let's think about what's going on. The inside X loop, this one, that is returning the column of data with heading new name. The outside X loop, the whole one, is looking up C in the column name and then returning the row in the column new name. So if I change this to type 2, I get 8, which of course is the piece of data I'm interested in. If I change this to B, I get 2, which of course is the piece of data that I'm interested in. So this is a way to use XLOOKUP twice in the same function to do both a horizontal and vertical lookup. So basically take two keys, a row and a column, and find the data. Now, we will see later we can also do this with a combination of functions called index and match. XLOOKUP is a pretty clean way to do this, and of course you have access to all the things we looked at the beginning, where we could return answers that if something didn't make sense, if you didn't pass in the right thing, again, what does it return, right? If I type in type 4, which doesn't exist, I get NA, and I can make this look better. So that's our XLOOKUP function. I strongly encourage you to stop using VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP in preference to XLOOKUP. In my opinion, it's a better function. I hope that was helpful. I will post this video along with the example spreadsheet without formulas filled in, as well as the example spreadsheet with the formulas filled in so you can see what's going on.